here from the United States, from Ethiopia, from Canada, the UK, Ghana, and Nigeria, of course. We are, like Soma said, we're discussing what we call Youthquake today. We're talking about what happens when young women take over leadership, and we're going to be sharing some innovative development solutions for now and after. I think we need to start off by understanding it's a very timely conversation for us to be having right now. With so much going on around the world, we have a global pandemic we're dealing with, there's a brewing revolution in America, there's advocacy for justice here in Nigeria around killings and rapes of young women. It's clear that things are changing. So how do we position and prepare ourselves for the coming change? How do we bound together and come up with strategies that allow women to thrive in the new world? Our panelists here have so much information to share with us today. So not to waste any more time, we'll get right into it. As Soma said, my name is Wuratunde Andrews. I am a communication for development consultant, and I'm also a guest lecturer at the Women Leadership Institute. So the first thing I want us to do is to hand over to our convener, our host, Ambassador Dr. Kema Chikwe, and she will just spend a few minutes introducing our topic today and a welcome address from her.
Well, thank you very much. I welcome all the panelists and the audience. Leadership is not about high positions. It is about moving and moving others, moving other people in any position or capacity. The Women Leadership Institute aims at institutionalizing women leadership at all levels in the African continent. Times are changing with technology, and again, the coronavirus is not disappearing soon, according to forecasts. New technology and new technological strategies are needed to drive development in Africa. In the African continent, we need new, informed, dynamic, and impactful leadership of women. So women must take the center stage to capture the momentum, because there is an obvious gap. This is a momentum for a new normal. And I believe that that new normal is women in leadership. More than ever before, WLI sees the need for bridge building, collaboration, inspiration, and motivation of women and women's groups to take our constructive leadership roles and make the desired developmental change and developmental difference. The assemblage of panelists today for this Youthquake, to me, it's like setting up the present and future tasks for the new generation of women leaders. I believe that everybody on this panel is building a generation gap between the past, present, and the future, because you are all very informed young women who have your own experiences. I welcome all of you to this program, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, Ma. Thank you. We're sure that there's going to be a lot of impact and a lot of takeaways from this conversation I want to go right in and start so we can meet our panelists and hear from them. I'll kick off the conversation talking with two women that we have on the panel that represent women in business. I will like for them to share their journey with us and talk to us about any strategies or advice that they have for women on how they can monetize their skills and passion. So we'll start off talking with Yasmin Bello Osage, who is a co-founder of She Leads Africa. And right after her, we will speak to Aisha Sambo, who is a communications specialist and a creative director. So over to you, Yasmin.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, WLI, for having me and for putting this together. As Wura mentioned, my name is Yasmin, and I'm the co-founder of an organization called She Leads Africa. We provide content, resources, and events for women who are hoping to build businesses and careers. As I was putting together my thoughts for this panel, I just have to be honest and say that I really do need to take a little bit of time to just acknowledge what happened over the weekend, the 2 cases of sexual assault that we heard about. It's been something that has really sat on my chest. It's made it very hard for me to think. It's made it very hard for me to function. It is going to be very difficult for women to get involved in business if they do not feel safe. I know that one of the sad things when you convene a group of women is that we know that there are probably people on this call who themselves are sexual assault survivors. And to those of them, I do just want to say, first of all, just to clarify that it was not your fault. Second of all, to specify that, of course, you are not alone. And third of all, just to encourage, though, I know it's always difficult that if you do need help to get it. I know in Nigeria, for example, there are organizations like the Mirabel Center, where I do apologize, I don't know a lot of the organizations in other countries, but that is something that I did just want to mention. And I really also wanted to take this time out to also speak to all of us individually as women, especially those of us who might not be sexual assault survivors, just as a reminder that this is the time when we really need to be there for our sisters. Whether it means being very mindful of friends when people bring things up to us, making sure that we respond appropriately, whether that means that we are educating the men in our lives, whether it's our sons, it's our brothers, about consent and what consent means. It's very, very important that we are doing that work. I do not know if there are any men on the call, but I think my messages to them will be very simple. One, it is around do not rape, do not be a rapist, do not apologize for rape, apologists, speak to your friends about consent so that we can move forward on this issue. Thank you so much for giving me that time and that space to just comment on that. And I do apologize if that took us off track. When it comes to starting your business or building a business, we have 5 to 7 minutes. So I cannot condense all the lessons that I know. So what I want to do is speak a little bit more about process. And to me, there are 3 really important things that matter if you are going to be a successful business person. Number 1 is you have to get very, very comfortable with being able to find information for yourself. There is Google, of course. There are organizations at WLI. I'm sure they have so many resources. She Leads Africa via our various social media pages, via our newsletter, our website. We also provide a number of resources where you can go and read more information. It is very, very important when you start a business to understand that you are a student, and it is important to take that time to actually learn what it means to be a business person. And this is across all the different functions. Whether it is finance, I know a lot of people say things like, I don't have a head for numbers. That is not a real thing. There is no brain that is specifically designed to be good at maths. You have to confront the numbers and you have to be comfortable with them. Whether that is in marketing, whether that is in HR, it is important to be a student when you start a business. And to be an appropriate student, you need to be able to find resources for yourself. And so I always ask and encourage people that as the process goes through becoming a business person, that you're always trying to find information. The second thing that I think is very, very important process-wise, and I think if you're here, you're probably already doing some of that, is surrounding yourself with like-minded people. I think that there is something which they say is that you are the average of the 5 people that you hang around with the most, or something like that. The people who you'll surround yourself with are going to have a very real impact on your journey. So find and surround yourself with other women who are trying to build their businesses, who are trying to build their careers. You will be able to learn so much more from them, so much more than I can tell you in like a 3 to 7 minute speech. So it's very, very important to find and surround yourself with appropriate people. It does connect, of course, to the issue of mentorship. And what I encourage everyone to say on that is to say that a mentor doesn't always need to be a famous person. They don't always need to be someone who's older than you. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to build relationships with those people, but you can mentor each other. You can be mentors to your friends, and your friends can mentor you. So start by finding mentors in your immediate surrounding, and then understand that you can build relationships with other mentors moving forward. And then the final thing that I want to say, process-wise, is that it is very, very important when you are starting your business to make sure you are asking questions and doing the appropriate research. I often think that sometimes people go, I have an idea, I'm very excited about it, I buy all this expensive stuff, I launch into my business. That's not the appropriate way to start. We live in a world where now you always want to collect research first, you want to test things out, you want to speak to potential customers, you want to speak to the market, you want to understand what the need is before you provide a solution. And so with that, I'll hand that over, but I will just kind of repeat again the 3 things that I said. The first one is be a forever student, become the type of person who understands how to find information. Google is a good start, and there are so many female organizations that provide resources for you. Number 2, surround yourself with the right type of people, either as friends, as mentors, whatever it is. If the people around you are not models of what it is that you want to be, you're not going to get to where you want to be. And then the third one is just making sure that you're always asking questions, you're always getting feedback, you're always doing the appropriate market research. Do not assume that you know, always seek to find out. Thank you very much for giving me this space, and I will definitely be on to answer any questions later on. Thank you so much, Wara and Mrs. Chikwe.
Thank you, Yasmin. That was spot on, and thanks for the time as well. And thank you for taking the time out to pass on that message about what's going on in the country and why it's important to educate yourselves and your friends. Thank you. I will have Aisha Sambo on now. But before we go on, I just wanted to say to the participants, we have a Q&A box on the bottom right of the screen. If you do have any questions as you're listening to our panelists, please write them in the box while we continue to interact on the chat section. But any questions that you want, direct them to the panelists in the Q&A box. Aisha, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the WLI Network. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Aisha Sambo. As Bura mentioned, I am the executive director of a foundation that I and a group of my friends actually started since we were 16 years old, and it's called Youth for Youth. Youth for Youth for short is branded as Y for Y, and as the name implies, we actually are a group of youths in Abuja who actively encourage other young people to volunteer in our community, because we believe through volunteering, young people can truly find their passions. First of all, I'm really honored to be here, to be among such amazing women, some of which I highly admire. It's a really good platform to have. There are 2 things that I would like to to take out from this session, and I'm sure as I go along, I'll highlight those. I have a really strong belief system that a woman is more than one thing, because throughout our lives, you know, at some point we will become mothers, at some point we might find ourselves in different sorts of situations or job environments, working environments. And I think one of our greatest strengths as women is the ability to adapt, because women are so good at adapting to change. And I know now with the pandemic going on, I believe that adapting to the current changes is going to really come from a workforce of women. However, beyond even being able to adapt to current situations is really our ability to adjust our minds. Interestingly and ironically, last year, our organization partnered with a number of other nonprofit organizations that offer psychological and psychosocial support, because we were very concerned about the minds of young people. You know, we can talk about um, strategies in business, processes in business. But at the end of the day, I really do believe that your mind is what really makes you. And even now in this growing pandemic, I'm not going to lie, I had it difficult in the beginning, adjusting, because I have several businesses that I had invested in, or am involved in. So that really took a toll on me. And so even from last year, the need to really reach out to young people, vulnerable young people especially, who do not even sort of know anything about mental health or their mental minds. It was really important for us to reach out with other organizations that offer these services. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we did. We planned a 6-month online campaign, and it involved different groups of people that came out to speak about their mental health problems. The mental health campaign is called Mind Over Matter. So you can look it up on Instagram, YouTube, Mind Over Matter NG. And the videos were quite encouraging. We went on to do some research post the awareness campaign to really see if the campaign had any effect on the audience. And we found out that people, more than 50% of the people who were touched by the campaign, found a need to actually seek psychological support. So that was really good on our path, that we could see that the campaign had an impact on people. Other than that, so I really do think that it's important for not just young people, not just women, men even. You know, mental health has such a taboo in Africa especially. You know, it's very easy to tell a man, oh, man up, or, you know, sort your issues out. But the truth is, we all do need that help, and people should be able to reach out when they need help. So that's really important, I feel, for me. And for anybody who's looking to get into business, I also think that research is very important. As Yasmin also mentioned, research is so key, I believe, to starting your business. I started a business last year called Shushi Shades. So I manufacture and sell sunglasses. And the brand kicked off sometime around April last year, and it's been doing really well. I've made 3 times what I envisioned to make back just from that business. And even now with the pandemic and the current curve, research has really helped me prepare for some of the unforeseen circumstances that we are now faced with. It took me about 2 years at least doing research before I actually launched. What was interesting to me while doing my research was I found that 70% of the sunglasses manufactured in the world are done by one company in Italy called Luxottica. So that obviously sort of pushed me to want to do something about it in Africa, because they're not in Africa. And so I've been meeting with a lot of manufacturers within Africa, speaking to them to see how to set up an actual factory here. For now, I do manufacture overseas because it's best for the current environment. And yeah, I think those are like 2 key things that I really wanted to say. Thank you very much for your time, everyone, for listening. And I hope that we can all still keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisha. That was very useful. Thank you for to yourself and Yasmin for setting the foundation and basically reinforcing the fact that age is not a barrier to any belief or dream or business or idea that you have. You basically need to always arm yourself with information, do your research, continue to be a lifelong learner, build a network, and stay focused on your objective. So thank you for that perspective. I would like for us to put all this against the legal framework, right? Because there's only so much you can do given the laws of where you're doing what you're doing. So I will start off our conversation with our our legal and policy workers that we have on the panel, kicking off with Mrs. Afua Karanteng from Ghana. Ms. Afua?
Thank you, Ura, and thank you to all the organizers at WLI for having me this afternoon. I'm Ifra Kranting, a partner at CQ Legal and Consulting, a corporate and commercial law firm in Ghana. We do some commercial transactions, most notably last year and this year, we've advised the government of Ghana on a 3 billion sovereign bond. So that's what we do. Personally, I'm also a facilitator, doing some facilitation and training on foreign corrupt practices for institutions, including entities like PwC. So thank you for having me, and I'm an avid flower lover, which leads me to my interest in agriculture. So today's topic talks about taking over. For me, I think using the word taking over may even suggest that it's to the detriment of a third party. I would rather even say ladies or young women stepping into or assuming a leadership position. Now, around the world, there is an increase in leadership positions of women. But we would find that indeed, when the Global Gender Gap Report was done for 2019, across 153 countries, using Ghana as an example, the economic participation and opportunity for women, we used to be 64th position, which is now 94th position. When it comes to women in education attainment, 2014, Ghana used to be 117th position. We're now 119th. If you look at political empowerment, we used to be 97th position in the world, and now we're at 107th in 2019. So the figures show that as much as efforts are being made to move forward, there's still a whole lot that African countries can do, and Ghana in particular, in which I have some experience. So for today's topic, I would seek to concentrate on three particular areas, being agriculture, politics, and technology. Now, if you look at the era we're in this COVID era, these three areas are most critical. Agriculture for our food security, politics for women to enhance the governance across nations, and technology, which is what we need and what we are using currently to get across. Now, laws and policies that promote the involvement of women in these three areas alone, if you just were to concentrate on these three, would go a long way in alleviating poverty and moving Africa to achieve its 2063 goals, which is a Pan-African drive for unity, determination, self-determination, freedom and progress, and a collective prosperity across African countries. So looking at agric, if you take the sub-Saharan Africa, women make up 50% of the agric labor across Africa. But unfortunately, that participation in agric is centered around subsistence farming or an informal approach to that farming. Indeed, if you take the activities that women provide within the agricultural space, many of these activities are not defined what women do. So as much as it's an economically active employment, in national accounts, they are not essential. They are essential to the well-being of rural households, pardon me. So if you look at the labor force in the agric space, for instance, in Nigeria in 2005, women made up 52% of labor in agriculture. In Cameroon, women made 78% in 2006 of the agricultural labor force. Now, using the agric as one of the core areas that we should focus on, women have several passions and we are multifaceted. We're able to organize ourselves so much more, I believe, than the men can. But if you use something like tomatoes in Ghana as an example, Ghana is the second largest importer of tinned tomatoes worldwide. We spent as much as 12.7 billion on imported tomatoes. Now, there's so many women who farm and sell tomato products in Ghana. There is often a glut in tomatoes where the tomatoes sit there and are getting rotten. Now, if you use that example, just the tomato example, you will find that women were more organized and they had more access to farming and more access to finance. Women would be able to make a significant difference in their economies and their ability to fend for themselves and actually make money. Ndidi Imvuli, who is a co-founder of the Sahel Consulting, which is a Nigerian company, is actually spending a lot on agri-food entrepreneurs to scale their businesses up. So on Agrig, my position is that women must get involved, get more organized to be able to access financing. As I go on in my presentation, I'll talk about an entity, a COVID fund that has been set up by certain Ghanaian women to help women access financing. Now, the second one being politics. As of October 2018, out of a total of 11,037 African parliamentarians, only 2,591 of them are women, as in 23% average across Africa of women in parliament. Now, in Ghana, we've had previous heads of state who have tried to bring up bills such as the Representation of the People Women Members Act, which is supposed to be some form of affirmative action to get women in politics. There have been several entities and conventions that Ghana has been signatory to, like the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Beijing Platform for Action, African Charter on Human Rights, and the Maputo Protocol. All of these are international conventions and women's rights activities that Ghana is a signatory to. But then if you look at the numbers, there is still a shortfall. There are 275 women there are 275 MPs in Ghana at the moment, with 36 of them being women. That is 12.75%. Whereas in Rwanda, for instance, you've got 61% women in the legislature. So the ways in which, in my opinion, I think we all know what the barriers are to women entering politics. It's the issues of stereotypes of them being branded as iron ladies, or monetary challenges, as in women not having the monies to go out there and campaign and get involved in politics. But nonetheless, on the political institution front, in Ghana, for instance, we've had a Chief Justice, Attorney Generals, Speaker of Parliament, Registrar Generals that have all been women and are women now. So the way forward, in my opinion, as far as politics and young women getting involved is to get an affirmative action law in place. In doing so, we could have things like a statutory candidate quota where a certain percentage of women among the candidates on the list are guaranteed. A quota of reserved seats mandated by law or the constitution. At this point, we don't have that. Or a quota system adopted by individual political parties. Some of the political parties in Ghana, for instance, have started a policy where they indicate that if you're a woman candidate, currently sitting MP, for instance, that you're not challenged. As much as that is a good thing, I think it also goes to the detriment of women in the sense that it's as if the woman should just stay in the position as an MP, whether or not she's good at her job or not. We would want a situation where it's a playing field, but then women are encouraged more and given the support to get involved in politics. For instance, there is in Ghana, a Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund Act, and this investment fund is to deal with infrastructure, and it's a state-owned body. In the legislation that governs this state fund, it says 9 of the of the 9 board members, at least 3 of them shall be women. So imagine that going forward, we have more and more legislation where a certain specific number is given to women. It would at least encourage educated women across the country and across Africa to get more involved in politics. So moving to my last topic on this, which is technology, women in technology. As I mentioned, the COVID era has brought to the fore the need for technology much more than it ever has been in the past. Studies show that women in tech industry constitute 28% of the professionals in the sector worldwide, and in Africa, women in tech as 30%. Now, if you think that in Ghana, you have about 46.4% of women-owned businesses, which is one of the highest across the world, then you see that women have such a big role to play. Now, currently, Africa is about to sign on to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Hello?
We can hear
Hello?
you.
We can hear you.
Sorry, I thought there was an interruption. Yes, Ghana is about to, Africa is signing on to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And in line with COVID, which is keeping all of us in our homes and in our various countries, there is ever more a reason for us to use technology. For instance, there are issues of logistics challenges where companies cannot trade across borders. So if you have women-led enterprises where they get involved in, for instance, blockchain technology, which is used to verify goods for them to move from one place to the other. If you can have, for instance, RegTech. I was recently on a webinar where they talked about RegTech, which is where various things like payment systems, customs trading are all being digitalized. So this is the time more than ever for women in tech to be innovative and creative about what they can do within the African space to get things moving along. We've always talked about girls in STEM, and now more than ever, that is critical. Now, how do we support the girls in STEM? Countries must be willing to go digital. And in going digital, there must be rules and regulations passed to protect that digitalization. Now, in Ghana, for instance, in terms of women in leadership in the tech industry, we've had CEOs of Vodafone, Airtel, Tigo, Tonaton, Jumia Ghana, IBM Ghana, all led by women. Now, for young entrepreneurs and young women wanting to get into the tech space, the issue becomes once again, not about their qualifications, which invariably they do have, but rather about capital. So it's for this reason that an entity has been set up, which is the COVID-19 Stimulus Fund in Ghana by Denta Amoating and Adline Akufo-Addo Kufuor, who are women businesses who have come together to set up this stimulus fund to support young women-led enterprises with a seed capital of $2,500 to $5,000 for them to start. And I believe as this goes along, there'll be more investment in this fund. And the more women invest in such enterprises or such organizations, including entities like WLI, it will support a woman and encourage them to get into the tech space. Now, in Africa, for instance, an institution that those who are on the call and are interested in tech could look at an entity called Tech in Africa, Women in Tech Africa, and they concentrate on women in tech. So my closing words is that Africa has one of the youngest populations in the world. And this is the time for us to capture the imagination of the next generation. Now, we can capture their imagination by getting them involved in things like technology. if we get them involved in things like politics and agriculture, which are the mainstays of moving Africa forward and making us self-sufficient, then Africa will be able to drive its own agenda. At this stage, I would conclude with words of Hubert Danso, who is the chairman of the African Trade PLC, who says, our underdevelopment is our strongest advantage. So now it's time for the youth, young women and the youth to take over and move on with innovative steps. That's the end.
Thank you very much, Ifwa. Thank you so much. There's clearly a lot to get into based on what you've shared with us. And we probably need more time to circle back and exhaust some of the points that you've raised, really. But thank you so much for that. And also for pointing out specifically that the role of women and more young people will really benefit in areas like politics and agriculture. And these are things that we need to take Africa forward. I want us to continue on this path and hear from our policy experts. The next person that's going to speak is Dr. Ama Ayo, who is a professor from Bangor University in Wales. Just before I pass over to her, I just want to ask that the panelists, a lot of our audience, our attendees are asking for your social media handles so that they can engage with you further and learn about more of the work that you do. So if you just take a second and put in the chat box what your profiles are, your Facebook names or your handles, so that the attendees can check you out. So we'll listen to Dr. Ama Ayo now.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the warm invitation. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Great. My name is Ama Ayo. I'm the program director for public procurement law and strategy here at Bangor University. So my interest interfaces two aspects: how to use the large public spend that governments everywhere incur to actually develop society in terms of business empowerment, human empowerment, as well as individual empowerment. Looking at the topic today, I just want to thank WLI for the warm invitation, because it re-echoes some of the ideas and some of the themes about us women taking up ownership for the future that we desire to have. On that focus, I want to just, because of the few minutes I have, I want to focus on two principal issues, essentially rights, looking at both human rights in the COVID era as well as employment rights, before I look at the issue of information and education on the rights that your businesses could also obtain during this era. Essentially, the essence of this discussion is to help tease out how we can educate ourselves more properly, because of the fact that during this era, the women are likely to be the ones. In fact, evidence has shown that women are suffering more, both professionally, emotionally, and mentally, as a consequence of all that is happening. Importantly, while we're suffering more, 70% of the global health population that's contributing to the work on eradicating COVID-19 or supporting patients and those infected comes from our agenda. So isn't that interesting that we are putting in more, yet we're the ones suffering more? And looking at the issues of rights, I just want to first of all talk about the issue of human rights. How can we look at the various countries where we're from to ensure that the human rights as entrenched either in the constitution of our respective countries or either in policies or conventions agreed internationally are promoted? One of the things that irked me at the beginning of this conversation probably was the gentleman who came up with the notice about the sexual violence issue. And unfortunately, this re-echoes itself day in, day out. We have choices. The fact that we have choices regarding how we dress, how we comport ourselves, does not give anyone the liberty to violate us. And that's the message we have to go out and spread. Our human rights must not be desecrated just because somebody else thinks that their human rights is to express it in violence. And I'm hoping that more of the younger generation will take that message forward. So moving back to COVID, one of the things that we need to ensure in terms of human rights here is about the lockdown measures that countries are imposed. We do appreciate that these measures are imposed for the safety of all, but we need to reflect and to think, to what extent do those measures actually contravene or exceed the rights that might have been given to the politicians? And this is something that I encourage each and every young person to educate themselves about. It's interesting, I was going through the internet and I was looking at a group on Nigeria. It's called Action Group Legal Helpline. And essentially they came out with the fact that a total of 103 cases of human rights violations had been identified during the period of lockdown. These involve indiscriminate arrest, unlawful detention, extortion, assault, domestic violence, stigmatization, and murder. And the reality of it is that women are more likely to be affected by those kind of measures. So it's important that as individuals, we support ourselves in understanding what rights we have. Yes, different governments have the right to put in place measures, but we have to ensure that whatever measures that they put in place are not conflicting. One of the interesting things I've seen from the Nigerian angle, for example, and even replicated here in the United Kingdom, where I'm based, is inconsistencies between rights promotion or between lockdown measures as communicated by governments. In Nigeria, for example, the state government would say something, the federal government would say something. Maybe it's time that as women group, we need to come out in force to tell them that if you need to bring out any measure that will curtail our rights, you have to speak from a consistent point of view, because a right that's not well communicated or a measure that's not well communicated would then inadvertently impact us. And the people that it impacts most negatively upon are the women. There's frequent use of excessive force. And I want to draw attention to this point because a number of our women work in informal settings, and they are the ones that go out into the markets and they can be abused. So perhaps what I'm urging is for protection of those informal network of women, the market trader, the people who go about doing things on an ad hoc basis. Are there protections in place for them? What can we do as women to challenge the government to actually support rather than abuse their right to earn a living? In addition to looking at the human rights angle, something else I wanted to focus is on employment rights. The COVID-19 era has obviously drastically affected businesses of one shape or form. Even the public sector is going to be affected. And the reality of this is that in the coming days and months, we're going to see a lot of employment issues arising. One of the things that businesses or employers, whether businesses or in the public sector, need to do is to put in place, they are under a legal obligation to put in place measures that are safe for us to work with. I was looking at the case from Nigeria. It's the Iyere and Bendel Feed and Flour Mills case, which was decided by the Supreme Court in 2008. And I find it really applicable to this situation. It says in that case that where there exists a service relationship between employers and employee, the employer is under a duty of care to take care for the safety of employees so as not to expose him or her to unnecessary risk. So going forward into the post-COVID era, or as we move into transitions of lifting of lockdown measures across the globe, especially in Nigeria, the questions we need to demand of our employers are, have you put in place safety measures for us to work in, women are most likely to be affected because they'll have to go to work, come back home to attend to the home front, and that exposes them to not only mental stress in the office, but also mental and physical stress back home. So these are some of the things that needs to be looked upon. Beyond this issue of putting in place an enabling and functional and safe environment for employees to work in, another thing that we need to look at is, or to educate ourselves about, relates to the right of employers to terminate our employment, or those kind of consequential causes that may arise because of the recession that is coming from COVID. One of the disadvantages that we have with women, and with us being women, is that sometimes we are silent a lot and we don't have the ability to advocate for ourselves. So I think that it's necessary for us as women to champion ourselves into groups that, if those kind of actions arise from employers, we activate our advocacy promptly in order to minimize the risk of losing our jobs. Building up upon these employment rights, many countries have brought in flexible working policy. Now, I'm not sure it's that advanced in Nigeria, but it's something that I would like us to champion, especially in sectors where it will be possible for people to work from home. Not only in terms of flexible working, but for employers to actually support employees with adequate infrastructure so that they can work efficiently from home. Added to that is the fact that if this is not advanced properly, the end return is that the women are the ones that are going to suffer in the long run. A study by Oxford University, Cambridge, and Zurich of 20,000 workers from Germany, US, and the UK found out that the disparity that's likely to arise in the workplace in terms of layoff, in terms of non-promotion, it's going to affect women more than men. And this is something that, championing the cause forward, we need to look at and to address. I know my time is almost up, so I'll just move on to the third conversations I want to have. That's around businesses. Now, a number of us women, we are really entrepreneurial and we're good at developing ideas and navigating those ideas into profitable status. But one of the things that I've seen amongst the women group is that we are disproportionately able to advance some of the networks that are necessary in terms of business support services to help us. The UK government, for example, here is giving out a lot of loans. Nigeria, I've read about a lot of grants that have been taken from the World Bank in order to support businesses, especially those that will be manufacturing pharmaceuticals, as well as other measures to support women, to support businesses, and to preserve the livelihood of workers and business owners. Perhaps we can move the conversation to actually challenging the government to make this information visible so that as women in businesses, they can access such opportunities in order to make best use of those assistance. So thank you for your time, and I hope I was able to cover the field in the few minutes I had.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ama. Everybody's clapping. Thank you for sharing that with us with practical examples as well. I have seen a couple of questions directed at you, Dr. Ama. So as soon as we're done with our next two speakers, we'll take a few questions. We'll hear from our other public policy specialist now, Mrs. Sarah Muyonga.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank the Women Leadership Institute for this great opportunity to speak among all these women, and I guess to speak on an issue that I'm very passionate about. My name is Sarah Muyonga. I'm a public policy specialist and practitioner. I'm Kenyan, but I'm based in Nigeria. I've been working and living in Nigeria for the past 5 years. And today, I think my focus will be a little bit on the law and public policy processes, and why, to emphasize as to why I think we should, not take this particular process lightly and realize the powerful tool that both the law and policy can have in terms of influencing gender equality and, you know, transforming the lives of women on the continent. And in my presentation, and I realize we do have 5 minutes, I'll try to be very short. I will focus a little bit on lessons learned from the Kenyan experience, because the women movement in Kenya has made some remarkable strides in changing both legislation in the constitution process that has led to some changes. And I think there are some commendable lessons that could be shared for potential women leaders on the continent. So I start off by probably just emphasizing that there's generally a tendency to think that law or any kind of legal change sometimes is not a big deal, especially if you're in a context where the laws sometimes don't amount to anything or they never change anything. So, or you're in structures where decisions are made in very informal kind of settings. So there's a tendency to ignore the law or policy or not invest in the development of law and policy. And but equally, again, I'd also caution that you could have great laws and have great policies that are still not trivial, resulting to that. But I think it's really important for us to, you know, focus the movement and the sort of like the actions of women leaders towards affecting and influencing the laws, so that we could have laws that actually speak to many of the issues that some of my panelists have talked about, whether we are talking about women in business, whether we are talking about gender-based violence issues, whether we are talking about public service delivery and the use of revenues. I think laws and policies are sort of made to kind of determine the rules of engagement. So I'd like to emphasize the importance of the women or new women leaders paying attention to the law and legal process. So I'm looking a little bit at the Kenyan context. I think Kenya had a chance to review its constitution in 2010. And in that particular constitution, there were a lot of gains which were made, which I would say were efforts of women who started well between the 80s, culminating to that particular point in influencing the constitution to be a bit more gender responsive. And the issue of affirmative action at least came out to play. We are not yet there. We would want to get there, but at least the issue of a quota system, or at least 2/3 representation by women, was introduced in the constitution. The constitution was a little bit more, speaking more about equality and non-discrimination of both gender, sex, people with disability. And I think in this particular instance, I think one of the important things to note is, one other issue I wanted to raise is, to mention before I go into that, is that I guess lawmaking process is a very politicized process. It's a political process. Many people tend to look at it like it's very technical and should be left for the technocrats. But people with experience, especially like Dr. Kema Chikwe sitting with us here today, would probably tell us that it is entirely very political. And I think it's important for us to realize that and see how can we get politically savvy and able to be in those spaces, in those rooms that these decisions are going to be made, or how do we get the numbers in there so that we can then make these particular changes. So maybe as my first point, I think I'd like to emphasize that law is a political process, and the interface between that, the politics and the technical then make the law. The next point I wanted to point out, looking at the Kenyan case, is that the opportunities or moments of legal change or lawmaking, they always create a very good opportunity to influence the law. And I think as women, we need to build the momentum in a way that we are always ready to take advantage of those moments. So if I take the Kenyan Constitution as a classic example, there were a lot of women movements in Kenya. One of the first major sorry, did I lose you? One of the major conferences was held in Kenya, and all these things kind of built up a momentum of very diverse group of women, but who tended to come together with a coherent agenda to then work and influence the constitution. So they pushed and created space to be able to talk about different issues affecting the constitution and how the constitution has to pay attention to the gender question. I think one other point I'd like to bring up again as a lesson and potentially something that could be taken forward is active engagement with the parliamentary process. I know many countries have tried sort of like women caucuses in parliament. I think Nigeria has the Nigerian Women Parliamentarian Group. The Kenyan Women Parliamentarian Association, I think, was set up way before this constitution discussion in 2002. And back then, most of the women in parliament, other than maybe two, were all nominated and not people who had won through the political process. But even with the small numbers, the women started sort of gathering together and trying to push for very specific legislation that affected the issues related to women. So some of the gains of sort of that political caucus and with different groups working outside, supporting that caucus and using the caucus as a channel, there have been a lot of gains on legislation around employment, on labor laws, like the maternity, women maternity period was increased, the prohibition of female genital mutilation, the Sexual Offences Act was passed through around the same period, the Children's Act was passed through the same around the same period. And as we have advanced, we've seen the women pushing very hard in parliament for them to be members of very strategic committee like the Public Accounts Committee, and they've tried to change the standing orders within parliament to be more gender responsive. They have looked at waiving tax on sanitary towels and many other gains that I probably can't come quickly. And this was way before the constitution. But now looking at the very critical moment of the constitution, and I say again, Kenya is still a very long way to go, but I think it's very important to recognize the efforts of sort of the women movement and some of the things in relation to law. A lot has changed, and even when we come to look at numbers, the introduction of sort of what is a gender quota rule or affirmative action, which is yet to be interpreted by the courts more clearly, has led to the increase of women in political office. So when we started the first cycle of right after the constitution, we didn't have any women governors, but now we have up to 3 women governors. Unfortunately, one passed away. Well, we have up to 7 to 9 deputy governors as women. And the constitution, the constitution introduced sort of like what we call counties, which are nearly like your states. And in the county assemblies, we've seen the numbers increasing. We've seen a position for women representatives being created. So slowly by slowly, you're seeing this increase, and it's trickling down to different things. From procurement at the state level, one of the requirements is any procuring firm from the government has to have either be women-led or not. We are seeing in the judicial system an increase of judges, an increase of judicial officers who are women. And I would say that all of these are sort of like what the law can do for you. And if the law, I guess, the interaction between the law, both the formal and the informal structures around the law, what they can do, for particularly the movement. Another point I wanted to bring forth is also the strategic use of the law to create what we call jurisprudence. I think we also need to test our court system. Like if some of the issues we have, whether they are from a gender responsive perspective, or say if the constitution provides for protection of the rights, maybe taking constitutional cases to court to challenge that some practices are not guaranteeing this, creates an opening for us to influence the laws again. So I guess in the Kenyan case, there are many cases. I think one case I remember when I was very young was one woman who wanted to marry her husband, and they were not from the same. It was a very famous case, and I think he was a judge, and they refused her. They did not want her to marry the man, and they were forcing her to marry the man from his home, or his original home. She challenged the process for God knows, I don't know, it stretched for more than 2 years, but I think eventually she did win the case. But that started challenging the question of inheritance, challenging the question of land ownership, which is another gain women can now inherit land which was not there in the past. So basically, I think the women lawyers in the movement and different people can also challenge the court process or test the court process and jurisprudence. And then I also wanted to talk about, in thinking of leadership and new women leadership, how are we also increasing women in the pipeline so that if there are women who are always ready to take up, sort of like the political office, political space in politics and all that, which I think is part of what the Women Leadership Institute is trying to do, and these conversations are trying to do. So I think it's really critical for us to think in that manner so that sort of like the older generation women don't do such a huge job and leave, and there's nobody who's taking it up from there. And then finally, to kind of reiterate a point that Dr. Kema raised earlier, I think the question of the power of mobilization, even when we think about the law and these gains, but the women movement and the power of mobilization, I think one of the things that happened in the Kenyan space is there was a lot of different women groups doing different things. People who are interested either from very direct human rights issues, people who are looking at more of economic rights related issues, people who are looking at just general development, and even people from the religious background. And some had extremely diverse positions, especially pro-abortion, anti-abortion, but just trying to gather all these people together to sort of come up with a coherent agenda as to what kind of policies and what kind of laws do we want to see that will propel women sort of to the next level. I think it was a critical lesson that I think could be replicated in different places. And so all these women sort of ended up working in different committees and different groups to influence the constitution back then. And some of them continue to work after the constitution to see the implementation of, or the constitution coming to life. And I think this is also very critical in looking at what the new generation women could do. And then I think my final point is really about, again, going back to the question of, is the law process a technical process or not? I think there are women in this group who are talking about different things. I've had women in so many quarters saying, I don't like politics. I don't believe we have the, should I say, luxury to say such things. If we want to change the system, if we want to create that new leadership, we have to have a seat at the table. And I forget the name of one of the first congresswomen, Black congresswomen in America, who said, if you're not given at the seats at the table, come with a folding chair. We cannot have the luxury to say, I don't like politics. Everything is about politics, whether I buy this cup of water, this glass of water, or this thing, everything is a political process. So the lawmaking process is also political. And as I said before, whether it's the technical bit, and that's why it's important for us to mobilize very widely, invest in education very widely for the new leadership, so that if, like Afua said, if we're talking tech, when they start talking tech policies, which women are at the table to discuss these tech policy issues? Which women are at the table to talk about tech legislation and things like that? Whether it's health, whether it's aviation, whether it's any of the more STEM kind of complicated discussions that are supposed to happen. So I think maybe I've taken more than my 5 minutes, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was fantastic. Thank you. I think it's very important what you said. We can't expect to see change if we don't participate. So laws and policy that directly influence and affect women need women to champion those causes and bridge the gap. So thank you so much for that. We do have questions for you, so I'll come back to you in a few minutes, just after we've heard from Salade, who can actually give us a practical view of what it is like trying to influence policy. She is the focal person for Kaduna State for National Social Investment Programs. So over to you, Salde. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. The challenge with being the last speaker in a group of people is that most of what you want to say has already been said. But I'll just try to speak from a personal perspective and my experiences. Like Maura introduced, my name is Sarade. I'm a public servant with the state government. I'm currently the focal person for the National Social Investment Programs. For those in Nigeria, you'll be familiar with the Homegrown School Feeding Program, Empower, the cash transfer program. So I oversee that at the state level. As I like to describe myself to my 6.5-year-old son, I say, when he asks, what do you do? Like, I try to help poor people live better lives and get out of poverty. So at the moment, that's what my life revolves around. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm excited at the energy from bright, intelligent, wonderful women here. I'm particularly grateful to Dr. Kema Chipe for providing this platform, because at the end of it all, that's one step in the direction that we're headed, you know, with our conversations and all that we try to do in promoting women's rights and seeing more participation from women in leadership. So it's an honor. I like it. I like to be around women, because often the conversation is that when women gather together, they're up to no good, or they hate each other, or they can't work together. And, you know, that also applies for young people, you know, from experience. When two women have a disagreement at the office, it quickly turns into a gender issue. You know, nobody looks at it, looks at the issues concerned. And even when it comes to the issue of young people taking missteps or having challenges at work, it quickly turns into a conversation about inexperience or naivety. And these are things that you see all across the board. They're not tied to gender or ageism. So I think part of the conversation here is to, how do we move this conversation forward from just, you know, limiting people on the basis of their gender or their age. For those who are Nigerians or are familiar with the Nigerian situation, many times young people don't get opportunities because you get to be told, wait for your time. You know, wait for your time. It's not yet your time to be there. You're not qualified. You haven't put in the years to be a leader or to. But what I do realize is that young people are a lot more flexible. They're more creative. They're vibrant. So there are lots of ideas playing in your head, which you can actually use to make a difference in ways that are non-conventional. Working in the public sector now, I see that it's quite regimented. It's very strict. There's a process. You go through the hierarchies. Some people have great ideas. They don't even have the opportunity to bring them forward. It won't even get to the point where it can make a difference. So these are issues. The more we push more young people into government, the more we push young people, females, into the public space, the more we would have a diverse and wide-ranging conversation and even have more inputs into the policies that come out. The Bureau of Statistics put our population, the gender gap, which previous speakers had mentioned, it's about 50-50. I think it's 49% women, 51% men. It's almost 50-50. So if we have 50-50% male to female ratio in the population, it's shocking to realize that in the Nigerian public sector, especially within the political office holders and even elective, you know, positions in the legislature, the executive and the judiciary, we have, it's a ratio of 95% men to 5% women. And that's by the MBS data for 2015. It's totally skewed. That just goes to show you how much we're missing out on. You know, if we have just 95% of people taking decisions on our behalf, you know, are men, you know, we're missing out a good chunk. I work with women, and part of the things we try to do, I think all but one of the heads of our units are women. And women there's this intuition, there's this passion, there's the sympathy and empathy that women bring to leadership positions when they hold. I read an article recently, one of the Harvard articles, where it says why women make better leaders. Women don't make better leaders because we're better skilled necessarily, but because there is something innate in a woman that she brings to the table. she's able to sympathize more, she's able to understand, she's able to pay attention to details and look at the fine print. Men usually are quick, move, motivated, they're just trying to get results. But for the woman, it's a woman that would notice when something is wrong in the workplace. She will pay attention to her staff. She will be the one to mobilize others when someone is bereaved, and say, let's contribute, let's reach out to them. Recently, when we did our last cycle of disbursement for the cash transfers, it was just at the point when the COVID had broken out. And part of the challenges for the last cycle was, how do we ensure social distancing? How do we ensure that beneficiaries adhere to the protocols that have been set out? For those of you who work in government or who understand the process, it's not like private sector where you request for something now and you're able to get it immediately. So while we were in the process of trying to work out all the logistic details, the head of the cash transfer unit in the state, who is a woman, had already gone ahead. She went on her own, not waiting for the government, for the resources to come in. She had gone to the market, she bought buckets with taps, she had bought sanitizers and stuff. So these are the little things you can see when women come, to the table and they take their assumed leadership positions. I don't even want to go into the conversation about youth representation in government. But talking and preparing for this made me look, yes, we have policies in place. We have the affirmative action, which says about there should be 35% representation of women in governance. Right now, we have about 5%. If there's been an increase, I'm not sure it's up to 10% in the Nigerian context. How do we move this forward? We can have policies in place. Implementation is a totally different ballgame. And it's difficult when the people who are supposed to implement these policies, in some ways, do not sympathize with you. So for instance, if men are calling the shots, yes, we can, say affirmative action, but in reality, how does this play out? Will the men squeeze out and push themselves out for you to take their place on the table? I'm not sure about that. It's the same that applies to youth. Will the people who are there, who are holding on, to these positions for life, move out and say, hey, just come and take the seat at the table? We need to think more creatively. I think for solutions to these problems, we have to look, and each of us seated here, especially for the panelists that are here, which is why I commend WLI for the great work being done so far, because they are already taking a step in that direction. For each of us, what is the representation, female representation in your organizations? What is the youth representation in your organizations? Are you deliberately trying to create and nurture and groom leaders in your organizations? Because it's easy to point out to the government, there's a limit to how much government can employ. This now falls back to the private sector, to the development institutions, to say we're being deliberate about this. So if I have, for instance, a bank or an organization or a business, and I say, I mandate that 50% must be women, I have control over that. I have power over that. I don't need any policy to tell me to do that. So it comes down to each and every one of us taking those decisions and, acting it, walking the talk, beyond sound bites and just having these conversations. So I think it's time to get creative. Another thing I'm thinking is that we need to support women to move up. So this is a wide array of professionals across different fields. How do we push for there to be more female lawyers at the top? How do we push for there to be more female architects at the top? Because from what I've seen in government, what happens, yes, there are elected positions, there are times there are vacancies and you're looking for people with competence to fill those roles. Last week, we asked for a list of people for a position, and 95% of the positions were male. It's not easy to remember, so we need to push women to be at the forefront so that whenever there's an opening, they remember the women. They're right there, side by side with the men, and they don't use excuses, to say, oh, yes, we didn't think of her, or this. They have to be at the forefront, and that's why I commend organizations like Yaga, like Budget, like lots of She Leads Africa, who are at the forefront of doing this. I don't personally know any of these people, but I know their work. And I know that they're championed by young people. So we need to push women up on that pedestal so that when the time comes, they're able to come out, they're able to assume those positions and fill those roles that are available. I think, I don't know how much of my time is spent, but like I said, I'll talk from a personal point of view. We need to do more, and we need to think outside the box. Outside policy, outside the laws, we have to think of creative ways to shatter those glass ceilings. If we go the conventional way, the Beijing conference was 1995. This is 2020. How far, how much mileage have we gotten between there and now? So we need to ask ourselves the questions and get thinking about ways, to move in and let women assume leadership positions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saudi. Thank you very much for that. That was timely, and we needed to hear that. And the challenge that you've given us all to do more, to take more action, to stand up. I think that that's spot on, and which is another reason why forums like this, the kind of network that we're building through the WLI are so important for what can happen and how many women we can raise up and push up to take up more spaces and represent. I'm going to take a couple of questions now. Sorry, can you all hear me? If you can, just wave. Okay, great. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions come through. Some of them I've collapsed into one because some people are asking around the same thing. So I'm going to start with our questions around business for Aisha and Yasmin. We had a couple of questions coming around access to finance, which is always a big thing in terms of business, because every business has a cost, right? So people want to know if there are any ideas on how you can advise startup businesses to sustain funds, and if there are any ideas on access to funds for people who have ideas and are trying to start up and raise capital. So I don't know who wants to do what. We can, do I see both? Yes, I see Yasmin and Aisha. So just give me a sign who's going. Yasmin, yes. Okay.
Sure, I can go. Thank you so much. Great question. Access to finance is a huge challenge. One of the things that I would say is that when you're starting off, it's very, very important to think about how you can start small. What I oftentimes find is that people want to start a business and they want to jump right to the end. I need to be spending so much on this. But one of the things that I always encourage people is to think about how can I actually start small? Because getting funding in Nigeria, I mean, there are a couple of options. There's debt, which happens to be very expensive. It also requires you to have a much longer track record. So when you're a startup, it's really just not available for you. It's unfair and it's unfortunate, but I think in life you have to approach the world as it is and not as you want it to be, unfortunately. The second one is equity financing. Usually at a startup stage, at a very, very early stage, this typically comes from your friends and your family. And so the problem with this type of equity funding is that it's inherently quite classist in that it depends on who your network is. So it's much easier for people who have a wealthier network to get more cash versus people who don't. So what I always encourage people to do, depending on where you are, I know there are some people who are saying, hey, it might be very easy for me to get money from friends and family, is to actually first think about, is there a cheap and easy way that I can actually get this going? If, for example, you're selling stuff online, maybe you don't need to create a website. Maybe you can just do it on Instagram. There are some basic things that you can think about. How do I get going a little bit cheaply? And then I think that the second thing that I would say is that the place where people get most of their startup funding from is sort of two places. It's friends and family, but oftentimes it's your own savings. So one of the things that I would say is that if you are looking to be an entrepreneur, one of the things that's very important, and it's good also for work experience, is to think about, might I be able to work in an organization, in a company, work for someone else for some time, save up a little bit of money, and then that allows me to start my funding, to get my, then becomes my startup funding. For myself and my co-founder, Afua, we worked for about 2.5 years with SLA as a side hustle before we actually transitioned it into a full business. Because when we first started, we really didn't have the funding to be able to sustain us as an organization. So those are some of the things that I would say around access to funding as a startup. I think that as you become a little bit more advanced, the types of funding that you can get change. But I'm focusing very, very specifically on people who are starting, doing early stage businesses here.
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so
sorry,
much.
I apologize. Sorry, is that what? Sorry, there's one more thing. The last thing that I would say is there are actually a lot of there are oftentimes some grants and pitch competitions available. So as I said earlier, going onto Google, if you just type in, pitch competitions for African businesses. I mean, SLA, for example, like we have an accelerator. There are various accelerator programs. So it's also really, really instructive to think about like how can I play around with like grant funding, with like pitch competitions, with accelerators. And for that, again, I would just say Google pitch competition for African women, pitch competition for Africa, accelerators for Africa. Like Googling these types of search terms will help you identify a few more funding opportunities. I apologize for that.
Oh, no, please. That's fantastic. Thank you. There was a lady in the comments that wanted to ask you specifically for research links for her industry, but she didn't specify what industry that was. But basically exactly what you just said. You Google what you're looking for. That's a great place to start. And then you continue searching and then tailor your search to what you need. For Aisha, you can add on that if you want to contribute, but there was also a question about the role of media in promoting what women are trying to do and businesses. So I'll hand over to you.
Okay, yeah, so thank you for that. I think Yasmin really just hit the nail there with everything that she said. I wanted to specifically speak about a creative fund that I was actually involved in putting together while I was working in PwC. So I worked in PwC for about 1.5 years. And I was so aggressive in advocating for a creative fund for the industry. Luckily for me, I had really good mentors who backed me up with that idea. And we actually went ahead and pitched this idea to the CBN. And so if you just search for the Creative Industry Fund, it's a CBN fund. Just read a little bit more about it, because I'm sure some of the terms that were implemented initially have changed a little bit. So that's one good fund to look at if you are in the creative space. With regards to the role of the media in promoting your business, I mean, now Instagram has really given people the opportunity to like scale up their business, and even you as a personality can actually make money just from being a personality online. I have friends who are influencers, and that's like a major source of income for them, posting for other businesses and so on. So don't underestimate the power of social media, I would say, first and foremost. And then the content as well that you put out there is like really important to your audience. Understand your audience. What age groups are you targeting? Are they looking at what you're posting the most? There are metrics on Instagram that you can actually look at to give you a better idea of even your customer base. And so just use that as well to sort of grow your business. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you very much. The next question is for our policy experts. Everybody has heard, and we've talked about women getting more involved, but then there's also the issue of women or young people, or anybody really, not really understanding politics. So the question is around, how do you break down politics and make it simple and digestible for people to learn and get involved and, stand up and take action like we're asking them to do from Saude's presentation? But how do we help educate people and make it easy for them to understand? There's anybody, it's not directed to anybody in particular. So if you just raise your hand if you want to answer it, and then I will go. Okay, so well, not everybody can answer it because everybody wants to answer it now. But I would, Chinomso is on here and we haven't heard from her, so we can direct that question there before we continue. You're still muted.
Oh.
Okay. You're muted now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tunde. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much, Cindy, for that opportunity to give an answer to this question. Well, for me, in my own personal opinion, I think breaking these things down to, the lowest way of understanding, I would say we should start, you know, identifying first and foremost from our schools, especially the colleges, find out children, girls, young women with this talent and this hunger for political participation. Encourage them and put up some leadership programs to enable them know more about politics. I think that is the way to start. Let them know more about politics, the society, and their roles as a human being and their quota to, implement in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And then I think we can take one more contribution on that. If there are any practical things that we can do, I would go to Cynthia. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Thank you, Rura. I think I want to just share an experience from the Not Too Young to Run movement and the Ready to Run campaign. And I would want to state here that we actually have a lot of young men and women who are actually interested in politics. Now, when the law was signed and when the bill was passed into law last year, 2018 actually, before the 2019 general elections, we had a lot of young people who wanted to run. So now, how do we break it down for young people to participate in politics and for young women especially? I think it begins with how we present politics, and because one, the narrative before has been that politics is a dirty game, is for the corrupt, is for only those who have money or wealth. One of the things we started doing with Not Too Young to Run was to make politics, permit me to use, sexy. And why is that important? Because young people want to see things that trend. So if you see the engagement on Not Too Young to Run, we went first to build a social movement on social media around political inclusion of young people, not necessarily calling it political inclusion, just basically saying you are not too young to run. And that was one of the things we achieved. First, breaking it down, making it trend, making it appealing and attractive to young people. And then the second for me is also tapping into that energy amongst the young people, beginning from, like Chinamso talked about, beginning from the secondary school levels or high school level, whatever you want to call it. And also introducing democracy clubs. One of the things Yaga started doing was introducing democracy clubs in secondary schools or high school, as you'd want to call that, to have young people who engage. So we had this democracy summer camp where you have young people debate on issues, do a simulation of a political campaign and see what it feels like to campaign for issues and get people to support you. So I believe it begins with how we engage at that level, start introducing civic education, democracy clubs within that level. The other for me is engaging political parties. Now, parties have existed in isolation from the people, and we cannot push for political inclusion if we don't get the parties to lead or to take leadership in that drive. And one of the things Teddy was getting parties to go talk to young people to register and become members. So engaging the young leaders or young women leaders in the parties to engage their constituents, to go to constituencies, to talk to people, to sign up and register in political parties. Now, if we don't have parties lead that conversation, young people don't feel the need to join in. And then I think I'll just want to run, because it's just responding to a question, was all we did, we Ready to Run, was to start up. So 2 years to the election, we launched the Ready to Run campaign. What we wanted to do basically, if you're a young person that wants to aspire for office, sign up. And would provide you with opportunities for capacity development, be it mentorship, be it how to raise funds. And so what we did was to create a database of young people and a special focus, because I'm interested in young women, on young women who are signed up, and then providing strategic support to them, either connecting them to opportunities or giving them, providing them with technical skills or technical support that would help their campaigns. Now, we didn't have many of them winning, but that experience cannot be lost. So for me, it's a multi-pronged approach, but it begins with how we engage at different sectors. My first take would always be make politics sexy. We need to start telling young people that, hey, politics is good for you because that is where decisions are taken and you need to get interested in that, especially for young women. The more we have women excluded from the process, the more we do not have policies that are gender sensitive or gender inclusive, and we need to get them to care about the process itself.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that contribution, Cynthia. I particularly like the fact that you said that not winning doesn't mean you should stop. So it has to keep going and start early enough. Thank you. So we do have 2 more segments to run through in the next 20 minutes or so. So we're moving our perspective now to talk to our development sector specialists now, so we can put this conversation in context in terms of what's going on around development and sustainability. So we are going to hear from Cal. Cal is the Global Gender Cohort Coordinator for CARE Africa, and she's joining us from Ethiopia. I just want to make sure she's on. Cal?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay.
So sorry, I got, yes, I'm on my phone, so the quality might not be clear. There's an electricity cut due to heavy rain. So apologies in advance. Thank you so much for having me, for Women Leadership Institute, for organizing this and bringing us all together. I'm happy and honored to be part of this exciting conversation with amazing and exciting women in the field. My name is Cal. I'm from Ethiopia. I'm currently the Global Gender Cohort Coordinator for CARE USA, based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. In the past and currently, I worked on women economic empowerment, youth empowerment, food security, and organizational gender transformation mostly. I'm going to focus this segment on the development sector and civil society, and I'm going to focus on challenging and transforming gender social norms. Let me begin by saying that women in our community, women in general and young women in particular, are leaders and have a significant role, be it reproductive role, which is imposed by society often, and their community and productive role, which is often left unrecognized. In this historical moment we're currently living in, we cannot deny the role of women. Women make 70% of the global health workforce, and for sub-Saharan Africa, that percentage is 65%. And a lot of the time, this proportion is a lot of young women who do this without any payment, who are also burdened with their own, domestic work and community roles. So while their role is undeniable, the challenges our communities and society tend to give a lesser value to these roles that women play on our everyday life, and is seen as given or irrelevant. And a lot of my experience is in the context of Ethiopia, and both the formal and the informal leadership spaces and decision-making space is very much dominated and crowded by men. And these are often middle-aged or older men. So I myself, as a young African woman, when I see my leaders, I don't see them representing the demographic context of the region, and the gender balance is lacking, along with other diversity issues that we want to consider. This is, we've seen a lot of progress, but the change has been very slow, and we need to move forward and putting women and young women in the center of our development work. So there are 3 factors that I think any development workers and development organization need to focus on when they work with young women. One is young women must have control over their reproductive life and their bodies. I don't think we can move forward if we cannot, guarantee the physical safety of young women in our community. If women are not allowed to decide when to marry, who to marry, how many kids that they want to have, if they wanted to have any kids, or when to have these kids. So this is an important factor. And the second is economic and education empowerment and access to economic opportunities. And the third is access to leadership and access to decision-making space, not just representation, but meaningful participation by women. And when we take a closer look at these three, and when we ask ourselves why women don't have control over their bodies and their reproductive life, why they don't have access to basic services and economic opportunities, almost all the time we will find the root causes that perpetuate these gender inequalities are negative gender norms, harmful gender norms, and social norms. We at CARE have this approach that we call social analysis and action, SAA, that we use. And the SAA is just not implemented in Ethiopia, it's implemented along the globe where CARE operates. So the SAA is an approach, a community-led approach by which community members themselves identify gender and social norms that affects women and girls in their community and that affects development in general. And they reflect and they challenge, they go through a reflective process through a community dialogue where they challenge these gender norms, where they identify the impacts by themselves, and then they come up with an alternative solution, and they come up with an action plan that they implement themselves. Our job as an NGO there is basically to facilitate the process and to support and to measure the changes that we see. This is completely owned by the community, and young women are the integral part. They are advocates, they are community mobilizers, they are volunteers, they are mentors, and they are facilitators. We further supplement the activities through a men and boys engagement approach, where we encourage men to question unhealthy masculine behavior and engaging leaders, especially religious and traditional leaders, so that they themselves and their institution to support gender equality so that they can serve as catalysts and role models. The one thing I see being unique in this model from other community dialogue is the reflective process starts from ourselves. So we believe that we as a development practitioner are also a product of the community. We are educated, we're expert in certain field, but at the same time, we have to have that process when we unlearn all the gender socialization that we grew up with. So we provide safe spaces for staff members, government and local NGO partner organization where we reflect our own gender biases and stereotypes without any judgment or punishments, so that we don't reflect these biases in our work and in our implementation. So that's one critical segment, and also to challenge organizational policies, women representation within the organization, recruitment processes to bring more young women. And as a result of that reflective processes, we actually managed to create a female-only internship program where young women come through the organization for a learning and working environment where they're mentored by other women like us, so that they can assume, an officer and advisor position in 2-3 years. So it have both an internal segment where we focus on the organization and an external aspect. With our communities, I think the major factor here is, as an NGO, sometimes we go with our own agenda. So we try to remind ourselves and to keep ourselves saying that this is a community-owned process and we're there to just facilitate the process. Because this involves transforming gender norms, involve behavioral change, attitudinal change, and something that we can never enforce. And the problem with it, and why a lot of organizations tend to deviate from that, is because it's really hard to track and to measure attitudinal change, and you don't see it immediately. So any other intervention that we do in terms of meeting the practical need of women and young women in the community, we can track it, we can measure it, we can see the change right away. But when it comes to the gender norm transformation, we don't see it right away, but it's very important. A lot of my panelists earlier talked about how it's hard to ensure the implementation of the policy, how it's hard to implement legal aspects that are already written, but hard in terms of implementation. And that's because the gender norm is pretty much entrenched in our social and cultural structure. A good example for me is the Ethiopian law restricts early marriage, like decades ago. But early marriage is rampant in many regions of the country, especially in the northern part. And a lot of the time, the community secretively organize these wedding parties without the district manager, without the police hearing about it. So by organizing adolescent young women, by creating a solidarity group, that we were managed to use this solidarity group so that they can report these cases when the community secretively arrange marriages. They go to the police, they go to the school, they support the change process. So I know my time is up, so I'm going to stop now. So it is really important, both in our individual life, in our home, in our interaction with friends, but also in our works, to challenge these gender norms in a way that doesn't harm young women, that doesn't harm other women, but in a very safe and reflective and challenging process. But that needs to be also supplemented by the top to down approach with changing and advocating for the legal and the policy change. And when those like meeting in an environment, that's when we can actually holistically address, young women, and then enabling young women to become the center of the development process. Thank you so much, and I'll be here for a question and answer later on.
Thank you so much, Carl. Thank you very much for laying out your approach with CARE USA. It does sound like it's a program or system that can be replicated across different countries and sectors, so that we can begin to see results of normalizing positive gender norms and influencing behaviors. Thank you so much. We will also, thank you for giving us the framework of what happens in Ethiopia. So we have our Nigerian development specialist here, Odunei Okonkwo. She is a public policy advocacy expert, and she's going to share with us now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, WLI, for this opportunity to participate in this webinar. I'm a development practitioner. I've been in the development sector for 17 years now, and I've worked on a variety of issues ranging from legislative reform, advocacy on women issues, and also more recently, I worked on an agricultural project that was trying to help low-income households become more functional market players in the agricultural value chain. And in my own presentation, I'll share two stories to bring it, more to life with practical examples of some of the experience that I've had in the course of my work. From what everyone has said here, I mean, it's obvious that women are the world's most underutilized resource. It can't be said enough. But unfortunately, most of these women, at least coming home to Nigeria, are poor and vulnerable. The recent Bureau of Statistics results, poverty assessments, showed that about 101 million Nigerians live in poverty. 101 Nigerians fall under the poverty line, and 50% of them are women. So when we talk about women taking over leadership roles, you see that a lot of these women that we want to bring into these positions are already bound by constraints that hold them even, bound to surviving every day, let alone talk about leadership. One of the things I have seen in the course of my work is that the more women become economically empowered, the more their aspirations change, the more they want for their families, and the more influential they become in their communities. Now, when we talk about leadership, what's leadership? It's all about influence. Women can't influence their communities if they can't even survive. I mean, if you look at a lot of the reports, they say a lot of Nigerians live on $1.90 a day. And a lot of these Nigerians we're talking about are women. So I'm going to approach this, my presentation about how women can take over from the economic empowerment angle. In developing programs, one of the things I have seen is that when you develop programs, women disproportionately benefit from these programs, because a lot of the time, there's not an understanding of the nuances and constraints facing women. And in designing programs that will benefit women, sometimes it requires innovative models, innovative interventions that would take into consideration their unique needs and some of the circumstances. So I'll give you examples in my presentation. So I've worked with women from Abuja slums, and I've also worked with women in the grazing reserve, Fulani women. And one of the things I've found is that as their economic circumstances improve, they do better with their children. So one of the projects I worked on, we had an agricultural project that was supposed to enable farmers produce more, have an increased yield. But we realized that there were not enough women in those projects. And upon further investigation, we realized that a lot of these women didn't even have the capital to begin with. So we had to put together an innovative package, which was basically a bundled service. So we got these women, their women associations, gave them everything they needed up front. The inputs, the technical assistance, they had the land, provided all these things. And these women were able to produce just as much as the men, first of all, and they were able to pay back. So they paid back with their yield. So if we gave them seeds, fertilizer, and all the things they needed to farm, at the end of the day, when they had their harvest, they'll pay back with maybe 2 bags of corn. And talking to the women, I made a documentary where I, covered the stories of these women. They were like, you know what, we want more. Next year, I think I can do 10 hectares. And you then realize, and one of the projects we actually worked on, which was a dairy intervention, the women, set up a school for their children on the grazing reserve. The first thing they did was set up a nursery school. These women started influencing other women. We trained one woman, she trains 300 women in 3 years to be able to process their milk better and make more money. And then we realized that the mobilization power of these women and their ability to convene other women made our project have a multiplier effect, because they were able to, the results just kept multiplying even without our intervention. And speaking to these women, I realized that a lot of the things we were taught to believe were not actually true, because with more money, a lot of the girls and women who benefited from these projects were now talking about, oh, you know what, I want to enroll in secondary school. Some were like, oh, I'm going to delay marriage. I want to go to university, which was really refreshing for us. So we then realized that with more economic empowerment, that would, it would help more women become even decision makers within their communities. Coming back home to Abuja, 5 minutes away from the city gates, we had a project with women also, because one of the things we realized is, how can you get young women to take over when in these communities they don't even have role models? I mean, you cannot overestimate the power of a positive role model. A young woman's first mentor is her mother. In these communities, how can you tell them to take over leadership when the people they have in their household, nobody has done anything amazing that they can even aspire to do or aspire to be? So one of the ways we looked at these communities, and most of the women were uneducated. And people say, oh, they don't want to go to school, is the way. But upon further investigation, we find that girls are more likely to drop out of school because, first of all, they probably maybe get pregnant or get married early, and it's like the odds are stacked against them. You look at adult education programs, there are lots of men. We started interviewing women and found out that a lot of the work they do at home makes it even difficult for them to engage in any other activities. So you find that a woman may be selling in the market, as soon as she's done, she runs back home because she has to take care of the kids. So what did we do? We took it to their community. We said, you know what, we're going to have an adult literacy program here where women can learn to read and write. Because if the woman is educated, first of all, she has more of a voice. You know what education does to people. So it broadens your understanding and your perspective on things. And educated women are more likely to keep their children, their daughters especially, in school. And at this program, you have women coming in with their babies. Some are still breastfeeding. The teacher even has a child on her back. And from 4 women, we grew to 100 women in a year. Because women, once they're equipped with skills and understanding, are able to mobilize more women to participate. And we start hearing stories of these women now going into their communities and participating in the relevant groups where they make decisions. Of course, we use this platform as an opportunity also to educate them on what their rights were and also have economic empowerment trainings for them. And we found that once the women started to benefit from the trainings and everything, they started getting more women involved. And one of the things I found that when women become more economically empowered and they have more of a choice and have more of a say in what happens around them. If you look at the Fulani women, most of them even had more time to spend with their children, because when we introduced them to more efficient ways of doing their milk processing, it freed up time for them to even invest, and have time with their children. But in the Abuja aspect, with more education, you find that some of them whose children were out of school were now, we want to get them back into the school. Now, these women can actually have access to opportunities, be able to take advantage of services.
Did we lose her? Can anybody else still hear her?
I think we've lost her.
Okay, I think we've lost her.
I think
Okay, we'll see if she comes back on in a few minutes to wrap up. But I think we'll just, in the interest of time, we'll move over
that are
to our
available to women, funds that are available to women to lift themselves out of poverty. Their children is having more positive role models starting from the community level. You can't talk about women in leadership and 50% of our population can't even survive, let alone even talk about being active participants in contributing to the decisions that would eventually affect their lives. Thanks.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we hadn't lost you again towards the end. Thank you so much for sharing your experience in developing women through the programs that you've been a part of and the importance of economic empowerment. It's particularly interesting that you said the community of farmers, as soon as they were able to empower themselves, the next thing was to build a nursery school. So it wasn't a case of women are waiting for another program that was involved in education to come into their community to build a school for them. It's that gift of once you empower women, you're empowering a whole community. Thank you so much for that. We will hear from Ada now. Ada is the Associate Director, African Studies Center at UNC Chapel Hill. And she's going to share with us for a few minutes. Thank you, Ada.
Thank you so much, Wura. Thank you, Ambassador Kemachikwe and Soma Kachuku for having me. I also like to acknowledge all the panelists on this forum, truly a group of inspiring women. One of the wonders of Zoom is that at any time of the day, you can say all the day's greeting and it will apply to someone in your audience. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Ada Omewanleri. I am the Associate Director of UNC Chapel Hill's African Studies Center. I'm also the co-founder of IDEV Africa. I have and I continue to support development work in Nigeria. So previous speakers have highlighted the difficult times we're living in right now, which is harder on women who, like Aisha said, are more than one thing. So to complement the contributions of the other panelists to today's topic, I think I'll just spend a few seconds highlighting some brief historical reminders which may help to set the tone for my perspective. World War I, women played a vital role in keeping the nation moving through their help in various industries. As men were away fighting, spaces opened up for women to take on untraditional roles. By taking on these roles and providing leadership in different capacities, women helped rebuild their society. Close home, in Africa 20 years ago after the genocide, Rwanda is quoted as one of the most stable nations in Africa. Remarkably corruption-free. In only 10 years, life expectancy has risen. Death of children under 5 has been cut in half. There's compulsory education program for boys and girls in primary school in equal numbers. Women can now own and inherit property and are active leaders in all sectors of the nation. What happened when the massacre stopped? What happened was that by the time it stopped, 70% of Rwanda's post-genocide population was female. So the women stepped up and occupied the space, created stability for the nation. And as one of our speakers had mentioned, today's Rwanda's parliament leads the world in female representation with about 63 or 64% of their seats held by their women. With COVID, we also see how women leaders responded to the pandemic and the effect it has had. As we can see, women have historically played a significant role in post-crisis reconstruction. This pandemic will be no different. In addition to the COVID crisis, I think it was Yasmin who started off by sharing the increasing violence against women in Nigeria. So we're dealing with COVID in Nigeria and in Africa. It's not just peculiar to Nigeria, but there's a heightened insecurity, increasing violence against women, police brutality, oil price collapse. There is a lot of reconstruction that would need to happen. And it's at the grassroots level. Odwin has talked about grassroots mobilization and community sensitization. So grassroots level, state level reconstruction, national and regional reconstruction. So these are all windows that women in our audience, women on the panels, some of them already working on it, can take advantage of to help rebuild their societies as leaders. So in leading, the window of COVID offers an opportunity to validate the authenticity of compassionate leadership. compared to the expectation that to be a true and successful leader, you have to adopt best practices based on how men typically lead. So I said typically because I don't want some folks to want my head, but now leadership has a globally accepted definition, although you talked about it, so I'm not redefining it. What I'm saying is that whilst leadership expectations are the same and accepted globally, the tactics and tools cannot be standardized, especially ones that frown on our attributes as women. So attributes that women possess more of and heightens those that they have less of. So let me explain. I read an article where a journalist defended Donald Trump's refusal to publicly wear a mask. The conservative journalist argued that Donald Trump was projecting America's strength. In quotes, he says, if Mr. Trump were to wear a mask, he wrote, that would signal that the United States is so powerless against this invisible enemy sprung from China that even its presidents must cower behind a mask. His analysis is quite consistent with traditional idea of a strong American leader, one who projects power, acts aggressively, and above all, shows no fear. So, in other words, a strong leader is one who conforms to the sweeping ideals of masculinity. There is an expectation that leaders should be aggressive and forward and domineering. But if women demonstrate these traits, they are seen as unfeminine. This contradiction has made it difficult for women to thrive, as we see in politics in Nigeria, in the business sector, and so on. So does today's situation remove barriers and open more leadership spaces and acceptances of different styles, especially for women? I can't categorically say yes, but I think it will, as based on how history has evolved. So the successes of women-led states in COVID shows that maternal instincts outweigh others. Hence, if nothing, COVID reinforces and validates the importance of women leadership style. There is a gradual perception change of what strong leadership can look like. Women are constantly in the catch-22 dilemma. It's either you're too soft or you're too hard. You're very rude or you're too polite. So my Igbo people will say, you keep going, it's not good enough. You go back, it's not good enough. So as a leader, you should be under no pressure to adopt styles that don't align with yours. Women naturally lead with their hearts and struggle with the world's engendered definition of leadership. What we have learned with COVID is that actually a different kind of leader can be very beneficial. This is someone's quote, Dr. Evans. Perhaps people will learn to recognize and value risk-averse, caring, and thoughtful leaders. Also, in conclusion, Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, I was listening to a podcast. She shares how she was at a party and some of her male friends walked up to her to congratulate on how her new business was doing. They left her with this: business is war. She recalls getting home very sad, sitting down on the floor of her apartment crying. And she said, eventually, if business is war, I don't want to fight. So she grew her business defying and removing all labels placed on women entrepreneurs on how they should behave, dress, act, talk. So Sarah's story is my personal mantra in leadership. I lead with my heart, knowing that I have a sound mind and head. So do the work, know your business, but lead in a way that does not betray the sense of who you are. Therefore, as we know, preparation meets opportunities. So what can a female do within her space, be you in development, in the private sector, politics? It needs to, despite us asking for space for women, we also know that it has to be merited. So you have to be ready. You shouldn't just get a position because you're female. So I'll offer and end with some practical suggestions. The first is think about how the system in your field and sector worked pre-COVID and how COVID has changed it. The second is that when you've done this, you then identify focus on a few of those and research solutions. Use every opportunity to network, upskill, reskill. Everyone is online right now, so reach out to people. Take your team along. We all win at the end of the day. So this is not the time to be a sad team member, be a team player. Women are constantly criticized of not being good team players. Strengthen allies, and this must include men with whom you share mutual respect with. Do not be modest about your capacities. I can't overemphasize this. The playing field isn't even. Women have a tendency to try to dim their light for someone else to shine. And please, I'm not talking about the home, husband and wife dynamics. This is not the conversation. It's about your space in the workplace. As a leader, if you have an idea, use your voice, emphasize it, and seek to be recognized for the contributions that you bring to your team. So I'm saying, show what you can do, say what you can do, and don't allow credit to be taken away from you. I mean, that's why plagiarism is a big offense in the academic world. It takes a lot to identify a problem, analyze it, and suggest solutions. So take your credit, ask for it, and give it as well. And lastly, stay ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ada. Yes, that's a word to all of us. Stay ready. So opportunity, preparation, and all of that, but stay ready. Thank you so much. I want to end the session by talking about action. So we've all talked about some challenges. We've talked about where the gaps are. We've talked about what we think women should be doing and everybody in society in general. But I really want us to close out with our last two speakers who are political activists and are actually doing things in this space to kind of give us an idea and practical terms of what the people listening to us today, how they can get involved and what kind of action we need to take to bridge gaps that we've identified. So I'll start with Cynthia once again to just quickly tell us, you know, in terms of action, what do we do now and what do we do after COVID?
Thank you, Ora, and thank you to the earlier speakers. I must say, I feel really honored to be part of this panel with powerful women across the globe. So just a bit of background. I work with Yaga Africa. I'm one of the co-founders actually of Yaga Africa, and I serve as the director of programs at the organization. We started 13 years ago when I was still in the university, my second year in the university actually. And one of the things I've learned in my 13 years of experience is that, like everyone would say, if you want to make a difference, you need to take action. It's beyond just passion. It's about taking the lead and pushing it there and remaining consistent. And I'll just share a bit with our Not Too Young to Run experience, and then they're ready to run. So Yaga Africa, basically, we work to promote sustainable democracies and development in Africa. And one thing we stand out for is to be a movement building organization, because we have learned over the years that to achieve purpose, you need to build a movement around the issue. You need to get people to care about it and give them the opportunity to take leadership, because leadership must be decentralized if you want to see positive action in a democratic society. And so we learned from that, because the first time we actually did push for an amendment to the Constitution to reduce the age to run for office. We were still students. We went as a single organization. That was in 2009. By 2012, we went with other organizations. Now by 2015, 2016, we decided to build a movement to get young people to care about youth inclusion, youth political inclusion, by pushing for constitutional amendments. Now, I'm a lawyer by training, and at first, our first approach was to come from a legalistic point of view, to speak all the English, to speak all the grammar, and engage lawmakers. But when you realize that politics is local and to influence political decisions, you need to get people at the local level to care enough about it to influence that from the local level. You change your approach of conversation, and that was all we did. Basically, like I said earlier, we made Not Too Young to Run attractive to young people, made it a social media movement. So there are lots of young people who may not even understand that what they were pushing for was to amend the Constitution. But for them, what they cared about was inclusion. So we met them at their points of need and concern. What did they care about? Inclusion. Basically tapped into that anger. Why do you consider about 60% of the population and yet you're less than 10% in government? Why do you have a system that would not even sustain your livelihood, or that would not even meet your need as a young person? Because people in power do not represent you. You don't have voices in power. And that was where we started the conversation. But we knew that it was beyond just making it trend on social media. We needed to push the action at the level of policy making, at the level of policy decisions. So the conversation for us on Not Too Young to Run was to adopt a multi-pronged approach, and that's what I want to come from the point of action. That one, you need the constituents. You identify your issue, you define what you want to push for. Then you identify those who care enough about it to join that move or to join that action. And then you identify who are those that have the power to ensure that whatever you're pushing for would achieve, would yield results. And then you build a cross-sectoral approach in your level of engagement. So first, we knew young people cared about that. But we also wanted to have influencers who young people listen to from different categories. So be it young people working in social media influencers, be young people in the media and private sector. So it was beyond the civil society or the traditional civil society we knew about. We wanted to build new centers of power. So we identified young people from different as youth leaders at the community level, youth leaders who were in faith-based organizations, and then young politicians who wanted to run for office but who couldn't because the constitution limited their chances to run for office. So that was, we had a broad spectrum of young influencers. And at the level of policymakers, we wanted to know who were those who would make the decision. First, to amend the constitution, you need a lawmaker to push for the amendment of the constitution at the floor of the House. So we had to identify champions who cared about inclusion, who also cared about the legacy, because you're also thinking about who wants to leave something for posterity. Those are people you want to reach out to. And then we pitched the ideas to different young lawmakers. Two stepped up and agreed to sponsor the bill at the Senate and the House of Reps. And they became our voice in the National Assembly. And working with them, they helped us to reach to their colleagues in the House and in the Senate, who also were going to be influencers. Now, why am I sharing this? Because the conversation around gender advocacy for me is broad, is deeper than even youth political inclusion. And because actually it's easier to push for youth political inclusion than women political inclusion. And I don't know why, let's just say the system is afraid of women because they know how awesome and powerful we are. And they know if they let us in, would actually show them what leadership should look like and what leadership is. So there's always going to be the pushback. And what we have learned in engaging within the society space is that over a period of time, the advocacy for gender inclusion it's been quite, it's been reasonably consistent, but most times it seems there's this delay, or there's this tendency to wait for when there's a new National Assembly and there is a new constitutional review process, and we start engaging. And after a while, we wait again. And then maybe when there's an issue we care about, we go to the streets, or we wait again. Now, the thing with women inclusion or women leadership is because there is so much fear and there's so much worry when it comes to women issues. We have to be more consistent and more targeted than any other advocacy that we push for. And that for me is a starting point. Drawing from the experience of Not Too Young to Run, learning that even to amend the constitution to reduce the age to run for office, it took us over 8 years. Because before 2009 to 2016, we finally had the law signed in 2018. And that is an issue that is easier to push, not talk about women inclusion. So it's about consistency. Now, why do I push on consistency as a particular issue? When it comes to women gender advocacy within Nigeria, I will use Nigeria because that is the system I'm more familiar with. I read about other systems, but this is where I work. Is the fact that first, our approach to governance does not even consider gender as a priority issue. So we do not even have a gender-sensitive approach to governance. Gender is thought about as an appendage, it's an afterthought. It's after everything has been done, then a group of women push, oh, there are no women. Then we start engaging from that. So meaning already we are working within a hostile system. So one of the panelists talked about COVID-19 and the fact that no one cared about women. The truth is, even in the composition of the presidential task force, there was no conversation around gender balance. And that is why the whole government's response to COVID-19 did not include a gender-inclusive approach. And what we had were more women who were impacted, not by the fact that they were contracting the virus, but because the policies, the response by government already put them at a disadvantage. So talk about the economic policies, talk about all the decisions taken by government, even the increase in gender-based violence. Now, these are things we shouldn't be talking about if at the initial conversation on decisions or response to COVID-19, a gender-sensitive strategy was part of, or was a priority strategy that was adopted. So that is what we work with within a hostile system. So when I talk about consistency, it's not something that can stop. It needs to, conversation around gender inclusion must continue. But this time around, we need to build new centers of power around gender issues, meaning that we have different issues we care about. But at the end, the goal is to make a system or society that is better for women. So be it on gender-based violence or sexual and gender-based violence, be it women working on women political inclusion, be it women working on rights, rights of the girl child, or rights to education or health, that we need to actually start identifying at different sectors who are the voices speaking up for women and start building a strong chain of conversations around that and a strong chain to drive action, because we need to have different voices speaking on a particular issue for it to actually start gaining traction. And that is what I believe would start opening up the space. And then getting, when I'm talking about multi-sectoral, also moving beyond the traditional conceptualization of civil society. Normally, we think of an NGO, an organization registered, and looking at those associations who ordinarily may not be seen as civil society, but actually are part of the civil society, be it the women, be it the market women association in the markets, be it the trade unions with women groups, be it the faith-based organization. I'm a Catholic, so I'll talk as much as the CWO women, that's a Catholic women organization, or the other women organizations that we have in different faith-based institutions and different religious bodies. So this time around, diversifying the approach to increase the number of individuals speaking on this issue. Because like I said, gender advocacy is beyond just women political inclusion. It goes to the core of governance itself. Then beyond building new centers of power, I think there is one conversation that is going on. As a young woman learning on the process, I get a bit worried when I do not see that level of intergenerational dialogue and leadership and transition between the different generations that have led for women inclusion. And why is that? There's always this tendency of we are the young ones. We have this style of approach. We don't like how the older ones are engaged, or the older ones saying, oh, we have a style of approach. These young ones don't get it. Now, for issues of gender, because according to the report by the World Economic Forum, the gender gap report, is going to take us about 100 years to close the gender gap. And for countries like Nigeria, it may take us more than 100 years. Meaning we need to keep that memory on gender advocacy and pass it down from one generation to the other. We need intergenerational collaboration on leadership for women inclusion, be it in governance processes or even in politics. And that begins with identifying the existing groups that have worked over the years, 20, 30, 40 years. They have a wealth of experience. And then the new ones coming up who may not necessarily understand the experiences of the older groups that have worked in the movement, and build that collaboration across board, because we need the experiences, we need the energies, we need everything we can put together to push this forward. And I think for me, that is what is very critical. In Nigeria, for one, I know as a young person, I work more with my young women, my young friends who are in the sector. So you talk of them, Takeover or the Stairs. There are so many other young groups led by young women. But one thing I'm learning to do now is to reach out to the those that I looked at as mentor when I was still in school, my mentors, talk with them to see how did you do this? If I'm writing on something, get their perspective on that, because there is no experience that will go to waste. We need that. So building that intergenerational collaboration and leadership. And the other is getting and building power through relationships. Now, why is this important? Politics is about power, is about number. And engaging on legislative advocacy, for instance, to be it reviewing the constitution to include more gender sensitive provisions, or even the Gender and Equal Opportunities Bill. For me, it can no longer be an all women affair. We need to get our men to become champions. Why is this? The numbers are against us. So let's use Nigeria, for instance. Out of 360 members, only 13 are women. Out of one in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, out of 109 senators, only 8 are women. At the state level, out of 991 state constituencies, only 44 are women. So the numbers are against us. Meaning when they go to make decisions, when they say the ayes and the nays would always scream above the ayes for when it comes to constitutional amendments. So one of the things we said in Wiyaga Africa was, from not young children, we had more young people who became members of the National Assembly. Sadly, more men, actually, more young male won the elections. And then we also have women in parliament. So currently, we're working with the Women in Parliament Committee and working with the Young Parliamentarians Forum. Now, the Young Parliamentarians Forum extends to young lawmakers between who are 45 years and below. That's a large cohort. And one of the things we have done currently, we have the chair, who is a male of the Young Parliamentarians Forum, actually sponsoring bills to amend the constitution to include specific provisions for women appointments. And he's doing that, working in collaboration with some other female lawmakers. And I know someone once asked, why would you want a man to sponsor a bill? I say, it's not just about asking a man to push for this. It's asking to be a co-sponsor, to work with other female legislators, because you need to understand the game of politics. Now you're looking at who are those who are the influencers, who are the floor generals in the National Assembly. And for us, is to look at geographical and gender balance. So having a young man from the core north, be it north to east or northwest, to be one of the co-sponsors of such a bill or to lead those kind of conversations, because you need him to convince the lawmakers from his geopolitical zone, where you always have the nays, to start buying into that. So that is one of the things we're working with the chair, and those are the bill actually passed the first reading, a specific sections of the constitution to amend for women political inclusion, but also working with the Women in Parliament Committee. They also have bills provided that are past first reading actually in the House of Representatives. Now, it's having different people push for the same issue. At the end, what the House may do is to say, oh, go back and reconcile and come to harmonize and come back with one bill. But what is important is that we're not losing any opportunity. Any opportunity we have, any young person that's interested to sponsor a bill on women, we push that. But in the conversation, one of the things we had said is, in the conversation around pushing for women, let's talk about inclusion. So even the bill by the chair, because we needed him to care about the bill. And we said, it's not just about women, you're also going to be pushing for youth and persons living with disability political inclusion. That way, when a bill comes and we're asking for gender balance, but in that conversation, we're also putting youth and persons living with disability, we get the interest of these constituencies to push for this. That way we have different constituencies pushing for inclusion, while at the end, the goal is to get more women in government. So that is one of the approach that we started. We're hoping with as this house gets back into full sitting, we'll get more of that happening. Now, I want to share an example of what how results can be achieved if we're consistent and we remain focused on an issue. Now, when the National Assembly was setting up the committees on constitution review and electoral reform, one of the challenges was the fact that past assemblies, we always have those committees set up. They just pick a percentage of the women who are the minority. So you go in, you're pushing for issues, and your voices are drowned out. So one of the things, we had a retreat of Women in Parliament Committee, and we said for the House of Reps, you're only 13 women. Can you push for a motion, lead a motion or sponsor a motion and push for all the women in the House of Representatives to be part of the Constitutional Review Committee? Because you're just 13%. And if you leave it for the members to decide, they would just probably pick three women, or maybe the politics gets really crazy. And we issued a press conference, made a press issue out of it, and started calling on the speaker and saying, oh, for the speaker, show us your gender sensitive. Get all the women into the Constitutional Review Committee. And the Women in Parliament Committee, the chair of the committee, they led for that, pushed for that at the floor of the House. And a lot of people were tweeting about that. And before we knew it, the speaker actually had to make a concession and said, for the Constitutional Review Committee for the 9th Assembly, all the women elected in the House of Reps be members of that committee. So currently we have the 13 females who are currently members of the Constitutional Review Committee in the House of Reps. Now, this has never happened. So for us, that was an achievement. So I'm going to round up and basically just round up with this word. Now, engaging on gender advocacy it's a tedious task that can be really, really discouraging sometimes, because you push and you may not get results. So for me, what is important beyond this point that I've highlighted is the fact that as women working within the space would face a lot of challenges. There are a lot of threats that would come your way, but you need to first find out who are you, build an identity, because once you know who you are, it's easier to stand against dissenting voices. The second for me is identifying your people, those who are your support system, because you need those support system and you need those collaborators that will help push your issue. And for me, identifying your issue, because you can't be on every issue. That is why it's easier to build power through relations based on those working in multi-sectoral, in different sectors. So it's also about identifying your issues, sticking on that, but ensuring that your values connect with others who are pushing for those issues. when it comes to gender advocacy, the conversation will not stop now. And I think my time is up, but I believe that with more work and better collaboration across geopolitical zones and across geography, be it within the continent or beyond, that there is actually the need for us to remain consistent on advocating for gender inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I know it felt like there was so much to get out, but unfortunately our time is so far spent. That's really important and really useful. I think in everything that you said, I have firsthand experience on the tedious and discouraging journey that it is trying to advocate for gender advocacy when it's an afterthought. I worked on the Voices for Change program and we're involved in pushing the GEO bill, but in hearing you speak, it seems like there's a time to not give up and to continue and to galvanize together so that we can achieve the goal. So it should never stop, as hard as it is. Thank you so much for that. We'll round up our next week. Unfortunately, we literally have only about 3 minutes to hear from Chinomso, who will just talk to us again about action as quickly as possible and to motivate people to take action in terms of political advocacy. Chinomso? We have just 2 minutes and then we can wrap up.
Well, I myself am already exhausted anyway. I thank Her Excellency Ambassador Kamachikwe for this wonderful program. Thank all the members of the panelists for being patient to this time. Well, I won't take much of our time. I'll be very fast and brief. Well, I'll just talk about one or two roles that we as women, as young women leaders, could contribute into promoting gender advocacy in our society. So, well, I will look at the first point, young women leaders being encouraged to speak out and showcase their potentials through participation in societal and political activities. Well, it's not really all about speaking out, like Ada said. You know, it's about participating, fully participating. You know, encouraging from a society where they see young women as if you want to move into politics, they'll be like, do you want to spoil? Do you want to what kind of shame do you want to bring to us? They don't really encourage girls and young women to move into politics because they feel it's something dirty. It's not, how would I put it? It's not moral. It's not moral. They don't see, because they feel that young women moving into politics is for them to go into all sort of relationships that are not appropriate for, you know, a good family. So therefore, that actually shouldn't stop us from participating anyway. Rather, we have to let our people know reasons why we are, you know, participants in politics. So we will go to the next point as in identifying and harnessing talented girls and young women. Actually, I run an organization it's all about young women. It's called Young Women Motivation in our society. It's just all about bringing, you know, girls from the age of 35 downward to 18 into politics, them participating, knowing what politics is all about, involving and knowing that they have rights, you know, to be in leadership, right to make decisions, right to, you know, speak up for themselves. You know, if like as Cynthia rightly said earlier, that in the House of Rep, she mentioned so many cases, House of Assembly, House of Rep, and found out that the number of women in the House are very, very few, and it's not encouraging. Whereby if they have some laws to pass, and since women are not much there, it won't go in our favor. But when we have more women into politics, it helps them, it helps us, you know, fight for our rights. So, but that's, I really want to come into a place where I have to say, this cannot happen by magic. It happens when we start, you know, identifying young women who are interested in politics. As a political mobilizer, I have been to, and in fact, not just that, I'm I'm a grassroots mobilizer, you know, to be precise. I go down to the communities, I go down to the villages to talk to young women from the age of 35, whether married or not. Because sometimes they say marriage is a barrier, like, which is, if I want to go straight, let me just don't waste our time. I'll go straight to identifying some barriers which are actually hindering young women from attaining or accomplishing their goals in life. For example, these barriers can come to parental and spouse interference. You know, for me to be in politics, it takes courage. I didn't just come in, I didn't just, you know, move in. It wasn't free for me to join politics. You know, I had to fight with my custom, I had to fight with my parents, I had to fight, you know, I had to convince them, letting them know that if I don't have a voice to speak for myself and for my likes, then what are we for? Is it only, do our duties end only at the kitchen? No, raising, you know, giving birth and raising children. We also have to be in the society too, to protect those children that we are having. For example, I met a lady who had so much passion, you know, to be in politics. She wanted to be involved in what is going on. But because she was married, her husband was like, if you join these people, pack your things and go back to your father's house. That means you're not loyal. That means you're not submissive to me and to this marriage. You know, she carried that burden for a very long time. And with time, I started, you know, counseling her, giving her, you know, a little encouragement. And as a leader too, I also promoted her, you know, inviting her for programs or nominating her for some certain positions where she was able to, you know, prove to her husband that everything is all, it's not all about, you know, marriage and children and giving birth and all that. We also have our, you know, God-given talent that we have to showcase, we have to use to put the world in its right track. So the other factor I want to mention is self-depreciation. I came across so many young women who actually don't really believe in themselves. They feel like, no, how can we do this? We don't have what it takes. We don't have what it takes to be in this gathering, in this group. We are too, how will I put it, just self-depreciation. They were not comfortable that they can actually, through them, the world can actually attain the change that it's supposed to attain. So, but then I gave them one or two encouragement and also brought them in. So the other point I want to look at is so many factors in my research as I go down to the grassroots. I found out that even lack of basic education in some of our communities, you find out that most young girls don't even, you know, acquire the basic education of what do you call it, WAEC. You know, they actually drop in the senior class 1 or class 2 and either get married or go and learn a trade. Their parents will say, after all, after training you, you're going to be a man's property. You know, what if after training you in the university, what gain will I have as a parent? You carry all these things to your husband's house. So therefore, go and learn a trade and use it to support your husband. They all put their interest on their male children, which is actually not good. So, but then I actually, you know, encourage them to, even as you're doing that, it doesn't stop you from not attaining the basic education, at least WAEC, which is, you know, recognized in West Africa. Try to get that education to help you so that you can be able to mingle with the political system and the advancement in technology and the society. Then another thing I observed was marginalization from the male counterparts. Even here in politics, it's not easy, like Cynthia said earlier. It's not easy. You know, it takes a woman with bold heart to be part of it. The intimidation from the male counterpart is so much that sometimes you just want to give up. Sometimes you just want to like, why am I disturbing myself? Positions will come in, and when you want to talk, they say, hey, go and sit down, you're a woman. Go and sit down, what do you know? What do you have to say? Please sit down, let men handle situations. You're a woman, after then you can come. That would be your role, is to come and organize the things that we have, you know, we have set up. that is going to be a responsibility. Just see us, like, for example, I can see, even as I go for political exercises, the role I see women play in there is just to come, serve food, you know, sing song and wave hand and dance and all stuff like that. You know, if we don't teach these women, these young women, that this thing is beyond this dancing and singing and sharing food in gatherings, they won't understand. I keep telling them, even I ran an organization that that almost 20 or 25% of them were able to get get an appointment into the government, somewhere in the housing, somewhere in the what do you call it, in the local government councils. So they were in so many different, you know, agencies and disciplines of the government. And today, those girls are encouraged to go in there and work harder and bring more girls to join them, you know, in the movement. So, oh, can someone hear me?
Yes,
Can
yes, we
someone
can
hear
hear
me?
you, but we do
Yes,
need to wrap
yes.
up.
Yes, the time, I know the time is running out. So then you look at young women leaders should also aspire and work hard to be a leadership position. Like me, by the special grace of God, I didn't just come into politics. I said, okay, let me stay at this level. I observed, I learned, and I started climbing gradually. You can't just jump in, I want to be this and that, you know, automatically. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to come in, you have to learn the system, you have to learn the people that you're working with, and find how to, you know, avoid some certain problems and, you know, things that arises from this kind of activities. I've worked so hard right now, by the special grace of God, I'm still climbing. In this position where I am right now presently, it has encouraged so many of my followers. It has really encouraged them. Sometimes they even call me and said, what's next? How do you do it? I organize programs, we move down to different local governments, we meet, we go to different schools. Like I said earlier, if we don't teach our young girls, our young women, at least from this age of 18, even from 15, start teaching them, because some of them will want to, this one you say, if you go to school and say, what do you want to be? Say, I want to be a leader. I want to be the next governor. I want to be the next minister. I want to be the next commissioner. But then it doesn't happen like you know, you grow up and you just become that. You have to learn these things. And the appointment that the women here in our society get, it's not just because they merited it. Some of them are there because, you know, they had the governor is their brother, or or this leader is somebody related to them. Not because and when they get there, they won't know what to offer. But when people who actually, you know, merit these positions get there by you know, through hard work and full participation into the system, they will now know that they're there on a mission. And what's the mission? To make sure that gender advocacy, gender sensitivity, gender equality is actually promoted in our communities, at the grassroots, trying to get women, to awaken women to you know, think beyond the box, think out of the box, and look at the world as an entity that have so much potentials, you know, have so much potentials and goals to reach. So I will go into the last point so that we can get some questions and answers. So today, right now, I also observe from my personal experience that our parents, instead of our parents to promote us, they actually feel that, like I said earlier, they actually feel that we are someone else's property. But then you and I, we are women in leadership. So what is our role? Our role right now is to encourage other women who are potential mothers. For example, like for example, as I am now, I know that I have an important role to play in the society. If I have a girl child, I also start training my girl child to work towards not just seeing this world as we are here to multiply, you know, children and all that. See, I'll train the girl child to know that that she has a role to play in, in the development of the society. So if I do that, and the next person beside me does that, and you know, the more sensitization we move to, you know, to create, the more awareness, you know, we create to awaken the spirit to promote gender advocacy in the society. I think that is all I can say for now because of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're all giving you very loud applause if you can hear and see us. Thank you so much, Shalom. So the work that you do at the grassroots level cannot be overemphasized. It's very important. And that's an area that we need to support. There's so much to say. This conversation has gone on for over 2 hours, and it seems like we still have so much more that we could stay and share. But unfortunately, because of the constraint of our platform, and we can't, you know, our attendants have been with us the whole way. I just want to thank everybody for their time. Thank you for contributing all that you have so, you know, eloquently and so knowledgeable, and you shared so much with the audience that there's a lot of, you've inspired a lot of people today, and want to assure you that this conversation is not just blind talk. This is starting something and steering something that will push forward the agenda of gender balance and equality. So thank you so much to Dr. Ambassador Kenachikwe and the platform, the Women Leadership Institute, for this opportunity to hear from the women that we have heard from today. And please wrap up for us and tell us how we can continue to engage with the WLI. Dr. Kema, I think you're still muted. Okay.
Oh, am I okay? Well, WLI will continue to run this series in different sectors of development. But what is important is that we are going to resume our master classes, because WLI is an institution. And I'm so excited today. Somebody sent me a text message that I should engage some of the speakers as members of the faculty of WLI. So I'm very proud of everybody. I'll continue to engage with all the panelists individually, because I talked about collaboration. It's very important that all the different NGOs, groups, institutions focusing on gender development collaborate, work together. There's no competition in this business. I know that some are commercialized, but if we want to achieve results, all hands must be on deck. And we must join hands to make sure that the narrative changes every year in development and improves. It's not this, it's down, it's up this year, next year is down, and so on. Consistency, as Cynthia said, we have to be very consistent. I think at WLI, we're very consistent. What WLI has is me, because I have the experience. I've been out there. So what is special about WLI is that I'm giving back to the Nigerian society, or to the African society that I am associated with, in politics, in government, and in profession. So I thank everybody for their attendance and their kind, it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My sincere apology. This was supposed to be 2 hours, and it's 2 hours and 42 minutes. But the questions, there's so many questions here in my inbox on Facebook, but we're just going to answer all the questions on our social media platforms. And again, thank you to all our viewers. Thank you to the panelists. Again, WLI, our website is www.womenli.org, and we're on Instagram and Facebook. And we'll definitely keep in touch. Okay, someone says, please keep us in touch. Or if you want to follow up, you can quickly put your email address in the comment section so I can add you to the mailing list, or you can follow us on any of the social media platforms. But quickly, you can put your email address in the comment section. Thank you, Chinamso. Thank you, Wura. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Afua. Thank you, Amma. Thank you, Saude. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Audreni. The other panelists that left actually had very important meetings to get to. And one of our panelists, actually, today is her daughter's birthday. And I was hoping to say happy birthday to her, but we ran out of time. But thank you for engaging with the Women Leadership Institute. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of your day. And please continue to move women forward, because once we're at the top, we can make a difference. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
I'm just going to get all the comments.
What's going on?